to say that money is unimportant. And we may find out that it's going that we may be bitten by its very great importance when, not if, but when the Fed's bubble collapses. You can't simply print money the way we've been printing money indefinitely. Everyone agrees with that in principle. It's only a question of when that bubble collapses, and then God knows what will happen. You say account for that. It is impossible to account for a financial collapse. Financial collapses have their own dynamic, each one is different. They're all bad. However, money is not what runs the world. In fact, in one of my former books, I had a chapter, the title of which is Power Makes Money. Most people believe that money makes power. That's the opposite of the truth. Historically, it is power that makes money. Mr. Putin is not wealthy and does not dispose of money because he is productive. He disposes of vast wealth because he has seized power over it. Why is it that a whole bunch of Islamists right now wield a great deal of power in the world? It is because they have access to an enormous amount of money. That money is coming to them because the power over that money was granted to a bunch of desert bandits, not to say rats, by a U.S. government which believed in its own values. Oh yes, those values were that all states are created equal. Well, all states are not created equal. All states ought not to have the right to no state really ought to have the right to nationalize industries, to negate contracts. After all, neither the Saudis nor the Emirates created that oil wealth, developed it, et cetera, et cetera. These things were developed under contract, et cetera. So my point is that we ought to pay a great deal of attention to power and the management thereof. And that is what is going to drive things.
Okay. Ma'am in the front row, and then we're going to go to the back, okay? You're next. You got it? You're next. Okay. Go ahead.
I was just wondering if we've already crossed sort of a red line. I mean, when Putin went into Georgia, we didn't do anything there.
That's right.
Now he's in the Ukraine, and we have China and Russia trading out of our currency now. So, like, have we reached the point where we're about to do, like, terrible damage control, or is there anything that we can do diplomatically?
Just one word, very simply. Respect is a very easy thing to lose and a very, very hard thing to gain. If you want a lesson on that, read the Godfather's books or simply look at the movie and learn from Michael Corleone how to do it.
And I can just say I'm a mother, and you know, when I told my kids you better do this or else, I usually had a pretty good idea of what the or else was, and this administration doesn't seem to. Van, why don't you jump into?
Real quick, before I do that, I want to I agree with you about Obama's speech in Cairo and no follow-up, but that's been the story of this administration. The late Texas Governor John Connally had a great saying for folks like that, all hat and no cattle. Yeah. So I think that pretty much sums it up. But, okay. What I want to see a commander-in-chief get on Air Force One and go to Poland and go to Warsaw and go to Budapest and Eastern Europe and say that we are going to accelerate missile defense for Europe, and then go to Georgia and tell them we're going to go to NATO and we're going to have them speed up your application for NATO membership.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, sir. Shout it out.
This is specifically for my fellow Terriers, Dr. Codevilla. Go Terriers.
Did you have a question or just a cheer?
Now, the question is this. As we're going through Ukraine and being a Sovietologist and Russian speaker and all of that, the question is focused on looking forward, balancing our foreign policy, national security relationship with Russia and those countries in Russia's sphere of interest. This isn't going to go away with Ukraine. Looking forward, how would you suggest to President Obama's successor how they manage those relationships?
Did you want Dr. Codevilla to answer? Okay, go ahead.
Look, back during the Reagan transition, Richard Pipes and I were in charge of EUR, the State Department branch that deals with Russia. And I followed Pipes' lead on this and was happy to do so. His point was that we ought to, that our objective should have been to end the Soviet Union. Now, the paper that we wrote was the only official paper that I know of written in the U.S. government that actually advocated ending the Soviet Union. This did not mean nuking the Russians. What it meant was looking for every opportunity as time passes and events unfolded to weaken and so as to ultimately end the Soviet Union. Our purpose with regard to Russia ought to be to end that regime and any other neo-Soviet regime. What you do on any given day to achieve that depends on the opportunities that present themselves on any given day.
Okay, another question, ma'am in the front.
This is for anybody who wants to answer it.
Okay, speak loudly.
Usually, when we talk about foreign policy, everybody refers to the White House and what the president can do, and occasionally Congress. What can non-government actors, whether they're personal people in the room or NGOs, what can they do to further the dialogue or impact foreign policy?
Chris, why don't you take that? Because you've spent a lot of time in this NGO space.
Yeah, and I'd like to connect it to the previous question, too. So earlier this week and all of last week, I was in Nepal and Kyrgyzstan. And as an NGO, we try to create a safe space where we called our dialogue, or these series of conferences, Religion, Security, and Citizenship. If religion's a part of the problem, it's got to be a part of the solution. How does the best of faith defeat the worst of religion? And they have extremist, terrorist, motivated by their understanding of Islam, threat that is very serious. How is that going to be solved? Well, you have to have people who also take their faith seriously within Islam to speak against it according to their understanding of theology. That's an exegetical analysis. That's a hard thing to make, case to make to a government that fears talking about religion, especially when it's been educated out of their lives as in the post-Soviet space. Very difficult to do. At the same time, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan are watching Ukraine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kazakhstan is 25% Russian. Martha Olcott's got a great piece on Carnegie about how they're thinking about this. Kyrgyzstan also has a Russian minority, but they have no, not that Kazakhstan does, but there's no military defense there. How do you think about that? And again, you got to come back to, do you know who you are and where you're going? And do you understand your adversary? Putin is not off his rocker, as some people are trying to say.
That's right.
He knows exactly what he wants to do. He does not see himself as a Soviet. He is the last Romanov czar. Mm-hmm. And we breathe life into that corpse of an empire through our inaction. Mm-hmm. That's the irony of the situation that we're in. So we have to stand up. There's a number of things that we could be doing that would be smart on the Western front, as it were, through NATO, through missile defense, through visa, through freeze accounts. We can do all those things quickly. But the real issue is what happens in Central Asia if we do nothing here. Why not take back Kazakhstan? Why not take back Kyrgyzstan? There's nothing to stop it.
Zuhdi, why don't you go ahead since...
Yeah, I think one of the things we're doing is, I really think, and the long-term goal is sort of a Manhattan Project for focusing on what is the enemy abroad ideologically and putting together. We formed an anti-Islamist working group that includes a number of think tanks that all of you may know. We haven't gone public yet, but if you're interested in joining that, let me know. It includes most of the think tanks that are doing work in Washington on countering the ideologies of Islamism, not terrorism, which is a tactic, but the ideologies themselves. And once you do that, you can then push, as we did in the Cold War. The U.S. Information Agency was a big part of ultimately what pushed the issues abroad and globally, but that came from a private-public partnership. And if you look, a lot of the think tanks now that form the ACU, whether it be Heritage, AEI, et cetera, came out of this Cold War fuel, if you will, to say that America needed to develop sources of information to fuel those allies abroad that shared our values. In the Muslim community right now, which is going to lead this within from an exegetical perspective, we don't even have any think tanks that are doing this because most of them are funded from abroad, which links to the petro-funding question of energy independence. The elephant in the room on energy independence is that domestically, those allies which would be on my side, on our side, are beholden still, whether it's presidential libraries or whatever, to petrodollars
Yes.
that they don't want to offend because they're involved in party politics on the right also. And it makes them very difficult for them because they don't want to offend Islam and Muslims when most of the Muslims don't want these desert rats running their governments, and yet they're doing hugs and genuflecting on both sides of the party to a lot of these petro-billionaires because we are unable to form NGO groups strong enough to take on the Qatars and the Saudi Arabias of the world that are buying networks while we sit, tweeting on our issues.
Let me just
Yeah,
add one
quickly.
very quick thing. The key to forming these safe spaces, we call them 1.5 spaces. If in traditional diplomacy, conflict resolution speak, track 1 is government to government, state to state. Track 2 is people to people, NGO to NGO. Sustainable solutions comes at that nexus of 1.5. You've got to have government officials in the room and different faith leaders in the room all talking together off the record. Over time, a different kind of consensus emerges because they don't want terrorism or any kind of threat in their country, nor do they want to be known as the homeland of terrorism. And there's ways to anchor that, and I've seen it in every culture, every country, where there are good global citizens who agree with these basic values about how life should be organized at a local level in a transparent way to solve solutions there. But we've got to connect with them and have more of an interlocking series of 1.5 safe spaces if we're going to take this on and not have to do it ourselves as last resort with force. We've got to be smart about this.
Can I just jump in and say that you've now heard from 4 people with ideas of how we can reassert America's role in the world and in the Middle East and in Central Asia. Not one of them talked about invading anybody. So whenever you get into a debate with an Obama Democrat or somebody who says, well, if you don't want to have a deal with Iran, if you don't want to do this, you must want to invade. You have now heard people tell you that there is a third way, and a very effective third way. All right, another question? Let's go way to the back. The guy, right, on the edge, on the line. Yeah, you, jump up.
Sure, Dr. Seiple, you talked about how Russia is going to how Russia is likely to join NATO, I guess, going to happen in the next 100 years. Why is Russia more fundamentally culturally similar than a country like China or another country in Southeast Asia?
Did everybody hear the question? It was about NATO and what's the cultural similarity and what do you have to do to join the NATO club?
Yeah, and I'm not implying that one club is greater than the other club. Please don't hear me say that at all. I'm simply saying that the Russian culture, it's a great culture. It's European. It is a part and parcel of the European continent. But we have to be smart about how we engage. And I think we should engage Russia first, get through this moment, and invite them and then everybody else. Now, there's a way to do that, and I don't mean any disrespect about the Central Asians. I love them. My dissertation is on Uzbekistan. I've been to the North Caucasus. I've been to the South Caucasus. But there's a way to do this where you pay honor to the great Russian people and find ways to anchor in their culture and their values that are with Europe and their history that's with Europe. But what I'm saying in ASEAN, South Asia, and eventually in MENA, Middle East, North Africa, we have to have the same kind of constructs. There are no security constructs or alliances because there's no shared values. The alliance has to be undergirded by the shared values. ASEAN is the next one to be moving in that direction that NATO has modeled for 50 plus years. But we need to build that in other places as a part of a comprehensive, intentional, century-long strategy because we know who we are and we don't want to be sending military troops all the time.
Okay, does anybody have a question for Van Hipp? Because he's actually a really big deal, and so I think we should ask a question of him.
But can I say one thing?
Well, then just jump right
I
in.
want to say somebody in the back said, "Go Terriers," and I thought he was talking about me, the Wofford College Terriers, in the Southern Conference of Football, because I'm the sideline reporter in the fall. So that's what they thought about the Terriers.
A man of many talents.
Boston University.
All right,
I know.
John, do you have a question?
Yeah, I appreciate the around-the-world tour as far as the crisis and what's going on, and I know that with the end strength that we're going, we can't get there from here. One of the factoids that we always put out on the Joint Staff when I was there, that from 1991 to 1995, we downsized the military the equivalent of the number of people that participated in Desert Storm and Desert Shield, 540,000. You can't build that end strength up overnight. Second of all, as a retired Air Force officer, worked closely with Israel and trained the guys. That's a country that I worry about the most because because if there's a country that has no maneuver room, that you can fly over in less than 2 minutes, and every time they got in a conflict, within the first couple hours, airplanes with beams, bullets, and every other sustainment item that we talked about earlier was on its way. They can't defend themselves without America being there to support them. Their F-15s, F-16, E-2 Hawkeyes, you name it. Everything they have, except for their good tanks, was American-made. So we have a stranglehold on them, and I don't see how they can defend themselves if we suddenly turn our back on them and that red guarded switch becomes unguarded.
Van, do you have anything to jump
No,
in?
and I agree with you. I mean, we have consistently thrown Israel under a bus, is what this administration's done. And I am very concerned about the deep cuts. You know, we used to have a 2 MRC, a 2 military regional conflict policy, where we could fight on 2 fronts. Then we went down, oh, well, we're going to have a 1 MRC policy, and, or maybe, I think it was before that, a win, hold, win policy, where we would, and we would deploy here and then come over here. And then with these latest cuts, and it's even with, you know, they supposedly restored part of sequestration. I went back and looked at that. It's still $489 billion worth of cuts, and still another $500 billion. You're looking at still $1 trillion worth of cuts. They claim we can fight 1 MRC. I don't believe it. We have cut muscle and bone out of our defense budget.
Okay, Anthony?
Look, we have cut more than that. What we've done is transfers. Just looking at budgets doesn't tell you the story. We have transferred our money away from fighting forces to bureaucrats. We have now a majority of uniformed military personnel sitting behind desks doing non-military things. Our military has become increasingly inefficient. Number 2, and more important, and just as important, part of the same thing. We used to talk about win, hold, win, or win to. We no longer talk about winning. The very thought of victory has been expunged from our military colleges. For a while, I was on the board of the Army War College. I assure you, these people are being taught to lose, not to win. They're being indoctrinated into the Washington mentality, which is that, well, what we've got to do is to accomplish missions. Accomplishing missions is okay so long as the mission has to do with victory. And victory is defined as the achievement of your peace. But we don't do that. We don't define the mission that way. And so defining missions simply has meant the continuation of war without end. This is a very, very, very self-destructive thing to do, both internationally and, as I point out, domestically.
Okay, I'd like to do a lightning round now, and you guys get to vote too. You know, at Fox News, we love these lightning rounds at the end, where I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, and I want you to say yes or no, and then I want you guys to jump in as well. Do you think, and we're looking at the next 3 years of the Obama foreign policy, so let's look at what is the new American president going to face when he gets inaugurated in January of 2017? Hopefully it's one of our guys, but let me ask you. Do you think that there will be a U.S. Palestinian-Israeli peace agreement? What do you guys think? Okay, so that's good. No. Will Japan start a rearmament program by the time of January 2017?
Yes.
Okay, that's pretty good. Will there be a military exchange in the Pacific? Japan, South Korea, China? Maybe, okay, maybe?
Van said he can predict well. Van, what?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. Will Syria get rid of its chemical weapons?
No.
Yeah, no.
Iran will annex Syria by then.
Not quite.
Will NATO still exist?
But so what?
Okay, so will NATO exist, but not a very strong NATO?
Right.
Does Vladimir Putin stop where he is in Crimea?
No.
Everybody thinks he keeps going?
No, I think he stops where he is. He stops where he is in terms of formal arrangements, but he extends his political grip inside Ukraine.
Okay, so Eastern Ukraine.
No.
All of Ukraine.
No. He doesn't give a damn about the eastern part. He's got that. No, he wants a political hold on the center of it. Politically. I'm not talking about an invasion. I'm talking about political subversion.
Okay, then let me ask you the follow-up question to that. Is Ukraine enough for him, or do you think that Putin is going to look Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, whatever? Does anybody think he moves past Ukraine?
Yes.
Political control past Ukraine? What's going to make him stop?
Nothing.
Not this president. Do we think he actually would go and challenge a NATO member? NATO member?
Yes, of course, the Baltic states are now.
Okay, so Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania.
He'll do cyber attacks and things like that, which they've done before.
That was another one. Okay.
With their banking systems.
Okay, so let me go to cyber. Does anybody think there will be a major cyber attack? We don't know who's going to do it, but a major cyber attack on the United States, the banking system, the electric grid, the infrastructure. Okay, so we can pretty much agree that cyber, we think there will be one, right?
Syrian electronic.
Okay, how many people think Iran's going to have nukes by the January of 2017?
What'd you say?
Nuclear weapons. Will Iran have tested or otherwise shown that it has nuclear weapons? Okay, so that's a pretty big thing. Will Iran have the ability to deliver a nuclear weapon on an intercontinental ballistic missile within 3 years?
No.
Okay, so there's a little bit more fuzziness on that one. Will the United States suffer another terrorist attack of a major consequence within the next 3 years? You think so? Okay, and by major, I mean not just, 4 guys at Fort Lee trying to figure out where they're going, but a major attack.
What about what happened to San Jose on April of last year?
Yeah. Yeah. What he's talking about is that there was an attack on the electric grid and the west coast of the United States that was very clearly a terrorist attack of a sophisticated nature, and you and I only found out about it about 3 weeks ago.
That's right.
Okay.
The odds are with Mali and Syria, and the number of jihadists are increasing exponentially, so statistically our odds are poor.
Okay, so all the jihadis who are now fighting the holy war in Syria, wherever, how many people think that they're actually coming back to either Europe or to the United States, and we are going to see that kind of an attack then?
They are. There's been
The majority of people think
Absolutely.
that. North Korea, do we think that the young Kim the Third, do we think he'll be in charge of North Korea 3 years from now?
Yeah.
And do we think he will have tested nuclear weapons and long-range missiles?
Yes.
Yes. He's already tested nuclear weapons. He's had 5 nuclear tests already.
Some have worked, some haven't. But yeah. Okay, now do we think that there will be a North-South Korea conflict in the next 3 years?
No.
No. Do you think if there is a conflict in the Middle East, that in the Far East, where America's treaty partners, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, would the United States honor the military relationship if those countries came under some kind of an attack?
Not this administration.
Okay, well, no, this is what we're talking about, this administration. If there is an attack on a NATO country, and Angelo Codevilla says, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, the Baltic states, they are members of NATO. Article 5 says all for one, one for all. Would we respond and come to the support of the Baltic states? Only
Harsh
in a
language.
teleprompter speech.
harsh language.
Harsh language.
Okay, so in other words, if the United States does not come to the aid of a NATO country that is being attacked, then I think we can pretty much assume that's sort of it for NATO.
Yeah.
Does the United States have a repaired relationship with Angela Merkel and Germany and France and Great Britain?
Oh, yes. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, in the next 3 years.
Well, what do you mean by the repairable?
Well, I think the
Well,
relationship
they're
isn't terrific now.
Pretty left-wing.
But do we improve that relationship?
Yeah.
Okay, now we're going to now go around the world and say, and you have to participate, what is the greatest threat to American national security? Now remember, this was the question that Mitt Romney answered right. Okay, what is and that is a really good answer that we're not going to allow you to have. The answer was President Obama. We're not going to allow that one. This is a foreign policy thing. Okay, so who thinks that the greatest threat to world peace, American peace, is going to be a terrorist attack? Who thinks the greatest threat to American peace is the economic collapse? Interesting, that's the majority so far. Who thinks the greatest threat to America and America's peace is going to be the rise of a nuclear Iran, a nuclear arms race in the Middle East? Who thinks that the greatest threat to America is an energy-related? who thinks the greatest threat to America is some kind of a cyber attack on our infrastructure, electric grid, civilian infrastructure. Okay, what do you guys think? I'm going to go and ask each one of you, and then we're done. Okay, Zuhdi, what's the greatest threat to the United States in the next 3 years? And you can't say President Obama.
I would say the ideology of Islamism spreading from Syria to Iraq and Iran and Pakistan. They all share one common thing, which is the Islamic State. And that neo-caliphate of the OIC is a voting bloc where it has made the UN a dictators club. And that continues to be why freedom is irrelevant in the world. And they're working together. They may have some sectarian fights.
You're
here and
taking
there.
too long.
Oh, okay.
This is lightning round, lightning round. This
sorry.
is like Fox News. You know at Fox News
Yes.
when Megyn Kelly cuts you off. Okay, Chris, lightning round. Greatest threat to Americans' peace.
Sure, I would say two things. One is the threat of Japan-China war. That's serious. There's deep xenophobia in China, and Japan has not looked in the mirror about its past. All kinds of potential stereotypes. The second threat, though, we have to look at ourselves and how we're organized. We've got to get better. We operate from a Cold War structure that is continuously dysfunctional, and we invite attacks in our seams if we don't fix it.
Okay, Van Hipp.
Real quick, I think of the cyber, bio, and even the EMP threat are close, but I think the greatest threat is the linkage between Iran and North Korea on sharing nuclear technology and missile technology. That combination, I think, is a great threat to not only Europe, but also to North America.
All right, and Angelo Codevilla, what is our greatest threat?
A flight from reality.
We need a little bit more than
A
that.
failure to acknowledge the reality of any and all threats, failure to recognize the necessity to have solvency in foreign policy, to balance ends and means, just simply a flight from reality.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it up by saying I think the greatest threat to the United States is us. That if we've stopped believing in who we are and what we can do, then all is lost.
You're right.
But that's why you're at this lecture, because you are going to go out and do it. Most of us, except for Zuhdi, who's so young, but we were all part of the Reagan Revolution. We changed the world and we won the Cold War. And now for you guys, it's your turn. Go do it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate meeting you. You're a good lady.
Thank you.
Good to see y'all. I think I agree with everybody up here, man. Good.